I'm Robert Cujo Teschner. I'm the founder and CEO of V.Max Group, a national leadership and teamwork training company based out of St. Louis, Missouri. And what I do is I work to help teams become their absolute very best. Today on the podcast, we're going to talk about the impact that the movie Top Gun made in my life, a movie that ensured that I would not become a classical violin player professionally, but rather an Air Force fighter pilot. We're going to talk about the 4 F's, the simplest way to drive meaningful accountability in any organizational setting. We're also going to talk about the importance of stripping away ego and why all leaders need to be able to do so in order to be able to bring the best out of their teammates. And we're going to end with the notion that accountability has nothing to do with punishment. That's what we're talking about today.
Congratulations! You are tuned into Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 executives and those who are dedicated to creating a quantum leap in leadership. Your host, Dov Baron. He's an executive mentor to leaders like you, a contributing writer for Entrepreneur Magazine, CEO World, and he's been featured on CNN, Fox, CBS, and many other notable sites. Dov Baron is an international business speaker who was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers to hire. Now, over to Dov Baron.
Welcome, dear friends, fans, and fellow aficionados of leadership excellence. Hey, would you do me a favor? Send me a note, DM me on one of the 4 big social media outlets and tell us what platform you use to listen to us. Is it Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts, whatever app you use? Tell us your favorite episode. Tell us what app you use, what episode has been your favorite, because I'm going to offer a prize. I'm going to pick a winner from all the people who enter, everybody who sends me a message. I'm going to offer a prize valued at minimum $1,500. So it's going to be a really great prize. I promise you, this is your chance. So send us a note, DM us, tell us where you're listening in, what is the platform you're listening through, and what's been your favorite show and why. I want to thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know, and I want to welcome you to this episode of Leadership and Loyalty. So let me ask you, what do you need to do to up-level your leadership? In the corporate world, the idea of accountability is seen as a core function of management. That has meant finding the individual or the team that is to be accountable for the stuff to be done. Now, if you think about it, in many ways, we have had accountability upside down. Here's what I mean. We pay more attention to knowing who to blame in case we fail than we do to creating the conditions to succeed. Oftentimes, accountability is seen as a threat rather than a debrief strategy for success. So what might happen if we absolutely turned it around? Well, stay tuned, because that's where we're going on today's show. I'm your host, Dov Baron. I'm here to assist you tapping into the one thing in your business that changes everything by transforming meaning into action. Curious to know more? Go to dovbaron.com. That's DOVBARON.com. And this episode of Leadership and Loyalty is brought to you in part by our other podcast, Curiosity Bites. Curiosity Bites is the answer to the question, how can we bring together people who completely disagree? This is exactly what your heart, your mind, your soul has been craving. It's your chance to sit in on some real and often intense conversations with some of the world's most interesting people. We're talking about astronauts, neuroscientists, neurosurgeons, philosophers, holy people, quantum physicists, skeptics, entrepreneurs, multi-Grammy award-winning entertainers, actors. I mean, it's phenomenal, right? And people you might think you'd completely disagree with, you're going to find truly fascinating. Simply go to dovbaron.com and find out how you can sign up for and sink your teeth into the delicious Curiosity Bites. And we always need your help in staying relevant. So please get over to wherever you tune in from and do us a favor, rate, review, and share the show with everybody you know. We really need that. We really appreciate it. If you are a regular listener, big thank you to you for making us the #1 podcast globally for Fortune 500 listeners. And we're honored and grateful to be cited by Inc.com as the #1 podcast to make you a better leader. All right, let's strip it down and dive right in. Accountability is something that would appear to be baked into leadership. And every leader has to ask the question, who is accountable for this? And that's not usually to pat them on the back and say, well done. It's possible that we've got accountability backwards. If so, how can we get it so that our people want to truly embrace accountability? Well, let's find out together, because our guest today is Mr. Rob Cujo Teschner. Now, Cujo is a veteran of operations for Northern and Southern Watch over Iraq. He is a former F-15 Eagle instructor at the prestigious U.S. Air Force Weapons School, the Air Force Top Gun program. He's also a former F-22 Raptor fighter squadron commander. That's the CEO of an organization that employed more than $4 billion worth of low-volume, high-damage assets designed to take the fight deep into enemy territory. He is a founder and principal at V.Max Group, a leader of and teamwork training company. To top all of that off, he is a cancer survivor. So, ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and help me to welcome best-selling author of Debrief to Win, How America's Top Guns Practice Accountable Leadership, Mr. Rob Cujo Teschner.
Love the intro, Dov. That was outstanding. Thank you.
You're very welcome, sir. It's good to have you with us. Thank you for joining us.
Great to be with you today.
So we got some exciting stuff to dive into, but before we do, here's the question I want to lay on you as a leader. I think it's an important question. When you're feeling like the heavens have opened for you and you're in your favor, or when the feces hits the fan, what is it that truly gives your life meaning?
Oh, Dov, that's easy. That's my family. It's the reason why I exist. They're the lifeblood of why it is that I go forth and do what I do. And at the beginning and at the end of the day, they're the folks that love me regardless of whether I'm on my A game or whether I'm coming up short and I'm just a grouch. And I experienced that. I saw it firsthand when I was recovering from both of the cancer surgeries. And I realized that of anybody on the planet, my kids and my bride, they were the only ones that unqualifiedly hung through with me all the way through. And I'm forever grateful for that.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Absolutely.
So in the context of leadership and moreover leadership development, what's the question? One of the things that happens to me all the time, as you know, I'm a consultant. I'm brought into all kinds of organizations, and they're often looking for an answer, but they're looking for an answer to a question that's the wrong question. So in the context of leadership development, what questions should we be looking for the answers to that oftentimes people are not? What do you think that is?
I think part of it is, how do we optimize the human system? How do we optimize this idea of an integrated group of human beings that ought to be working together, to harness the collective good that they bring? We look so much at process. We look so much at numbers. We're constantly tracking KPIs. I think part of the mix is, what are we doing to optimize integrating human beings to be their best working with one another?
So when you say optimize, I want to make sure we remove all jargon for a minute. So what does optimization mean to you?
It means how do we get this human team to become its very best, and how do we measure that? What are the key performance indicators that we have for a human performance notion of teamwork? And if we start there, my contention is everything else follows, right? Then we're going to get to the metrics that we're tracking. Then we're going to get to the engagement that causes people to want to stick with us. Then we're going to get to that long-lasting relationship that says we're something special. And that's, I think where we want to go when we're talking leadership.
Yeah, because you obviously come from having a military career, which is all about optimizing people and getting the best out of them, of course. Did you come from a military family? Was that your background?
I did. Yep. Dad was in the Air Force.
So your dad was in the Air Force. Was that, and just to be a little personal here for a moment, but do you feel like that was an expectation? Was that?
Not at all.
No.
Not at all. No. Dad was perfectly happy with me becoming a professional violin or piano player, which is the track that I was on at a very, very early age. But the question was actually inversed. when he retired, when my father retired, which was between my sophomore and junior years in high school, I felt like we were quitting the best team that I could ever think of being on. I felt like I was part of his Air Force career, and I missed the team that he was a part of when he hung up his uniform for the last time. So in order to be able to get back into that system, I said, all right, I'm going to join. And so did both of my brothers. We loved being part of that family.
So all three of you joined.
That's right.
Now, so you said you were a piano player and a violinist?
That's right. Starting at age 2, classical violin and piano.
Wow. So that would have been looking like a career.
That's right. And a very successful, very accomplished violinist, especially at a young age. So if I had chosen to go that route, I think the path was very, very promising there. But instead, I wanted to be part of the big team called the United States Air Force.
Do you still play?
I play the piano primarily now and the bass guitar. And my wife knows, my kids know, if I've had a stressful week, they're in for performance.
They're in for a concert.
Yeah.
Oh shit! There's a concert. That's a stressful week. I can hear the piano. Oh
That's
my
right.
God.
That's right.
So you played classical piano. So all the Baroque stuff and all that. Beautiful.
I do, but these days we translate the pop tunes that I enjoy into piano and play that so we can sing along. I mean, it's really become cathartic for the family. When Dad is stressed and he goes and plays the piano, everybody kind of joins in, and it's a unique family event.
So, can you? I mean, I get that that it's the short version is I wanted to join the team. Okay, I get that.
Yeah.
But can you talk to me a little bit? Because I imagine that there had to be a pull inside of you, a tearing, because anytime we make a major choice in our lives, there is a pull, like oh, I could go this way and it should go that way, and I mean, you dedicated from age 2 to classical music. And that must have been an enormous pull for you. And you said you were very good. So can you talk to us about that turmoil? Was it turmoil?
Not really. And if you think about it, for my evolution, Top Gun comes out in 1986. I see that movie at an airbase theater full of fighter pilots. I'm a young kid at the time, and I was so influenced by that. So I saw what the future could hold if I could reimagine myself as a fighter pilot. And then you add to it the fact that there was such a sense of purpose. There was such a sense of overarching teamwork. My father was a judge advocate general, Dove. He was a prosecuting attorney in the Air Force. So he didn't fly. His eyes were bad. He wanted to. But just being around that atmosphere,
I can't handle the truth.
Yeah, that's right. That was Dad. And he was very successful at that. Right. Actually, he enjoyed a few good men. But the point of it is that we as a family felt that we were part of all of that. We felt that we were part of the team. And so when Dad said, all right, it's time to retire, and he went stage left, the rest of us were kind of left with this feeling of, not abandonment, but just, wow, that meant something. We'd love to be part of that. How do you duplicate that? Don't see that being duplicated on this side of the divide. So for me, that was an easy question to answer. I'll just go and join myself.
Right.
After some struggle to get started by way of the Air Force Academy, I was able to quickly reimmerse myself in that world, and I miss it now that I'm done with it.
So when you say there was a struggle, tell us a little bit about that, because one of the things you and I had talked about in our previous conversation, that there was an experience in there that transformed you from who you were to who you were before the Air Force, and then who you became as a fighter pilot.
That's right, Dove. I mean, if you think about it, in my case, I go to the United States Air Force Academy. It's a selective institution. Not everybody who applies gets a chance to go. I was probably the last person accepted into my class. I would say that because I was given a letter of non-acceptance, and I didn't find out that I was going to go until a couple of weeks before basic cadet training started, which means that other people had to turn down their appointments in order for me to get accepted. Okay. Now, even to be an almost rejected member of my class, I had to do pretty well academically. I had to demonstrate that I was good at other things besides academics. So they want, a well-rounded picture of whoever, which means a lot of, hey, look at how cool I am. Look at all of the accomplishments that I bring to the table. I'm an outstanding individual performer. And that's replicated now, 1,400 times with all of my classmates. When we get to the Air Force Academy, the dynamic is shifted. It's not about how well we perform individually. It's how well does the organization perform, and how are we lifting up the person who's struggling the most to be able to meet standards. And a simple illustration of this was roommates. If I came out of my room for a uniform inspection looking tip-top, 100% on point, everything is done exactly to expectations, and my roommate looks like a slob, guess who's going to suffer the consequences? Because the standard is, how strong of a team are we, and how much are we supporting one another in advancing our collective capabilities to meet the expectations? And so the whole fabric of team was really emphasized, and we understood now what it really meant to be a member of the team, and we learned to subordinate our individual interests to the good of the team, which shifted the dynamic and built a really strong team. Now, when I go back to the Air Force Academy, which was a tough place to be for 4 years, I'm moved. Every time that I drive onto the reservation there, I'm moved with a sense of awe for the fact that I got the chance to go through this learning program, this leadership development laboratory with a bunch of other young kids who went through the same formative experience, and in these days are now running the Air Force. And that's pretty remarkable. And it all started as 17 and 18-year-olds.
So, but forgive me for presumption, because that's entirely what it is.
Certainly.
In the corporate world, we all know that there is a good deal of nepotism. I'll talk to my dad and we'll get you in, start that company, oh, come on in, we'll give you a VP position, all that kind of stuff. I know someone who knows someone, you'll be all right. And you've got a dad who's been a bigwig, in that world, and you got a letter of non-acceptance. What was that about?
Yeah, it had nothing to do with Dad. First of all, he wasn't that big of a bigwig. He retired as a lieutenant colonel. But it came down to, do I pass muster? Do I meet expectations? Am I what the Air Force Academy is looking for? At a time, by the way, 1991, where on the heels of a very successful Desert Storm operation, there was a huge, I think the draw to come into our class was larger than it had been for decades prior, just because there was an enthusiasm and an esprit of, hey, that would be a great place to go make one's mark. And so
this is under George H. Bush, right?
So this is coming in. That's right. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And there was an enthusiasm and a passion for joining the military at the time. So my records did not pass muster, and it didn't matter who Dad was. It mattered whether or not I was going to be worthy of acceptance, which I think is a pretty cool way to look at things.
Of course. But then you did get in because somebody dropped out.
That's right.
Wow. So you could have just as easily not got in.
I was fully expecting not to. In fact, I was on my way to the University of Missouri, Columbia. I mean, at least in my mind, I was finishing up my last final when my mom came and picked me up from high school in a very embarrassing move, took me to lunch, and then told me that I'd been accepted here at the last minute, which I was not expecting at all. So, yeah.
Wow. That's very cool. That's a great story. Thank you for filling us in on that.
Absolutely.
So, when you look at all this, of course, that's the background. But the world of business and corporate leadership may need to be more like that, but isn't really like that. I mean, there's a lot of, and I'm sure it's true in the military too. I've worked with military leaders myself, as in privately. And I know that sometimes there's ego, but not like there is in the corporate world. That whole emphasis on the team is much bigger. So why do business professionals, and moreover, what can they learn as valuable lessons from fighter pilots?
Well, if you think about it, I mean, right now, the entire world has been on a wartime footing for the last year and a half, right? COVID has driven us into a point of of execution where every day is a mission. And, you know, every business leader who's listening into your outstanding podcast knows that they've either had to change how they do what they do, or even what it is that they do in order to keep the lights on, the doors open, to keep on making things happen, which means making pivots. And at the same time, figuring out how to optimize that human system, the team, or the group of teams that brings the business to life. And if you're sitting there trying to figure out how do we make those micro adjustments in order to be able to manage daily through all of this uncertainty, you know, where do you turn? What example do you look to, you know, for an organizational footprint that says this is how it can be done? I would argue that the armed forces of any of the countries that we're interested in would be a great starting point. Why? Because they live in disruption. They deal with complexity and ambiguity day in and day out, and they've got to deal with a workforce that comes from the same background that every business selects from, and figure out how to optimize it to get the job done. And that was the theory that that I came into this line of work with, was that a team is a team is a team, and what works in the most volatile and disruptive environments should work in that environment, no matter what the domain is.
So, you know, I started out by talking about accountability, which, as I said, is kind of baked into the idea of corporate leadership. But I feel like in many ways, accountability is upside down. It really is not. The reason I think that most people sort of buck at it is because it's blame relabeled. And you lay out, I mean, I know you have a document that you share with the people who follow you, that even our listeners can get, which lays out the steps of a debrief, which is very different than what we think of as accountability. Oh, you know, this was on you, Bob, Fred, Susan, Ethel, Gladys, it was on you. So now you're going to get your legs slapped. That's kind of, you know, the way it's been. You have a very different process for that. As I said, you've laid out these steps for a debrief. Can you walk us through some of that so that our listeners can grasp it?
Absolutely. And maybe I start kind of at the macro and then we work our way down into the tactical over here. The whole premise of a team is that everybody's bringing their best to try to achieve a collective purpose. And you know, I would say if we just take off criminal or evil intent, like that, that we can deal with, right? And we're specifically focused now on teammates that are trying to accomplish mission success, and for whatever number of reasons don't get there. And it can include laziness, it could be lack of focus, it could be any number of things that we might look at as blameworthy. We can put that all into the pile of, this is the team that's trying to perform. How do we optimize that? Accountability has, you know, two outcomes, really, if we boil it down to its basics. One, it could lead to punishment. On the other side, it could lead to reward. And so I ask all the time, what do you see more of in your organization? When you practice accountability, what does it lead to? Punishment or reward? And I'd say 99% of people that respond to that, CEOs typically will say, yeah, it's about punishment. Why? Because we use accountability when there's been a failure and we're looking to figure out who it was that made the mistake. And we talk about in a public fashion why it is that we're not going to tolerate that anymore. And that's going to be the way forward. We're going to rid ourselves of that mistake. And so somebody feels blamed or shamed in a public setting, which now has triggered their flight mechanism, and their desire to engage and to give their all has been decreased, not necessarily increased. My approach would be to start with, how much are we rewarding the good that's taking place, and how are we really scrutinizing why it is that we're winning? It does us two tremendous bits of good. Number one, it allows us to celebrate the heroics that members of our team are bringing to the table. We need that positive reinforcement. I don't care who you are. You could be the head of state. It's nice to know that people think you're doing a good job. It gives you that extra boost and confidence to want to keep on doing it. And the second piece is, if we've uncovered why we won, now we can go forth confidently tomorrow and say, let's try and win again, because we know it was because of us. We didn't just get violently lucky. We know that our process was appropriate for this set of circumstances. So let's scale it and win bigger tomorrow. Huge opportunity lost if we're not looking at that side. And then we come back to the failure side. Instead of looking at failure with the lens of punishment, blame, and shame, let's figure out how it is that we can talk about our mistakes, our weaknesses, our issues in a positive, uplifting way. How do we frame that conversation so that we can take a root cause and make it where we can look to tomorrow confidently and say tomorrow is going to be a bigger win because today we learned something meaningful. So that's the overview of this.
Yeah.
And then if we get down into sort of the tactical specifics, I'd offer your listeners 4 Fs.
Okay.
4 Fs as a great process to walk through a meaningful, effective, and efficient debrief. And the first F is, what are the facts of what it is that we're talking about over here? Let's say it's a sales process. Let's say that we started a sales process a few weeks ago. We need to understand what took place between the start of the sales process and to now. And we need to make this a collaborative event so that everybody has a say in what it is that we believe took place. We as leaders oftentimes, Dove, believe that we've got exclusive rights to the facts. And so often that's not the case. Our perspective is necessarily limited. We only see what it is that we see.
Of course.
We've got to turn to our teammates to figure out what they're seeing to get an accurate view of what the facts are. And that's a revelation oftentimes to us as leaders if we take the time to collaborate on getting the facts. The next step in what I would frame as the 4 Fs would be focus. What's our focus? What question do we want to answer over here? And if it's a sales process, let's say that we entered into our sales process and we said that our objective was to sell 5 widgets in 5 days. We sold 6. Okay, so the facts say we sold 6 widgets. Our question now in this debrief is, why did we outperform our objective? It's worthy of scrutiny.
Absolutely.
There's something we can learn there. There's heroics to be celebrated. There's something that we can learn from and scale for tomorrow, I think is really of value. And so let's figure that out. And if we didn't, let's say we sold 4 out of 5 widgets. Let's ask ourselves, why did we underperform our objective? Which then brings us to our third F. Third F is, how are we going to frame what we've learned? A debrief always involves some version of root cause analysis, digging for a substantive why, right? Like trying to figure out the why to our answer. In my experience, flying fighters for years, the last thing that happens prior to a success or a failure is probably not its root cause. It's a symptom of the root cause, right? Yeah. So we learn to dig. But here's the issue with root cause analysis from my perspective. It's sterile and it's blame focused. Right? Yep. Usually we're going to ask why. Hey, why Dove? Why Dove this? Why Dove that? Why? And by asking that why question a number of times, we put somebody on the defensive. I mean, instinctively by virtue of that question. And ultimately we're going to get to the, well, I forgot to flip the switch, or I forgot to do this, or I didn't do that the right way, which if we do that in a public setting in front of teammates can feel really, really bad. One thing that I learned on high performance fighter squadron teams was this: if we could talk about that root cause in a positive, forward-focused way, we could make a meaningful difference into the lives of our teammates. I flew a mission one time, Dove, that went horribly well. I mean, it was a disaster from moment number 1. I led a debrief that lasted for hours. It was all negative. Right, I highlighted all of our deficiencies, mine primarily.
Yes. After
we were done, my instructor stood up and said, Cujo, don't you realize we were 2 decisions away from victory today? He talked about the exact same situation that I had spoken of for hours. He did it in 5 minutes. He highlighted the fact that if I had made this decision differently here and he had made this decision differently there, which we now understood why we should have made those decisions differently, we could have won this thing. He asked me, he said, Cujo, can you make those decisions better next time? I said, yeah, I think I can. He goes, why don't you go out there and do it, brother? You've got this. He high-fived me and he walked out of there. He framed the conversation in a way that was uplifting, meaningful to me, gave me the same understanding of the situation that I had with my fully negative debrief, but said that I could, which then leads us to the 4th F, which is what's the way forward? What are we going to do tomorrow? If we lost today, what changes are we going to make so that we can win tomorrow? If we won today, what are we going to do to ensure that we win and win bigger tomorrow? I mean, it's about tomorrow is always going to be better than today if we run a positive, forward-focused debrief. 4 Fs is a really nice starting point to get there. If there's one thing that's missing from this process, as I've just laid it out to you, is how do we transmit that message to everybody across the organization so that everyone can learn from my individual team's experience today?
So how does it become a universal learning that translates across the organization, whatever the organization is.
That's right.
And I think that's really good. I actually love your 4Fs. I love the way it lays out. And I thank you for that story, because I think it's an important piece, is that at the end of a debrief where somebody takes ownership and accountability for something, they usually feel, if they're an accountable person, genuinely, they usually feel like a bag of poo at the end of that. They don't feel great. And a leader who's really paying attention is looking for, as your leader did, okay, what were the 2 or 1 or 3 or whatever it is, number of things that were just minor things that if they'd have changed, everything would have changed. And framing that leaves everybody in top-notch mental space, gets them out of the limbic system, gets them out of the fight, flight, or fear response, gets them into the prefrontal cortex, into cognitive thinking, and go, okay, I can do this. Fabulous. We are already at the end of part 1 of our show. So we're going to come back for part 2 in just a little while with our special guest, Cujo, and we'll talk more about that and what it is he's going to do. And we're going to talk more about his new book and what that is, and how you can find out about it. And we're even going to find out a little bit about that name, Cujo. Where does that come from? We'll talk a little bit about that when we come back too. But before we do finish, Cujo, would you please tell our audience where they can find out more about you and about your book and all the wonderful resources that you have?
Absolutely. Thank you, Dove. You can find all about me at vmaxgroupllc.com, VMAXGROUP LLC.com. We've got a link to the book and everything else about what it is that we do in my company.
Fabulous. And we hope that you'll stay with us. Well, we know that you'll stay with us because you want to stay curious, my friends. Stay curious. We'll be back in just one click for part 2 of our delicious conversation with Cujo. See you soon.